on, let's have a look. So
Series.
Mike, just before you get into it, so we're Mike and I are here doing what we're calling one of our Insight series and looking into executive alignment. So up until this point, we've examined what it means to be executive. The word executive might mean. We've had a go at alignment as well, and now we're going to string the two things together and see whether we can make some sense as to what executive alignment really means.
And let's just appreciate, Lee, that these are the way in which I look at executive and look at alignment. That does not mean that they have to be the same for you. And that's going to be really important as we move through this conversation to recognize that subjective language, subjective interpretation, and the ownership of that is really, in my opinion, how we start to break down bias. We all have bias. We're not going to escape it. We're just not very proficient, my opinion, at recognizing it and communicating it to other people. And so if we bring these terms together now, what we learn is that it's really complicated, that it actually requires a significant degree of legwork to actually carve out, to ensure, to create some really deep grooves, so to speak, for our executives to function within. And so we want core values defined. We want the goals of the organization well defined. We want aligned decision making. We want people utilizing the core values in a similar way and defining them in a similar way. That doesn't mean that there aren't some forms of differences or different interpretations of that. But it is really important to talk about these things and source out conflict, source out a difference of opinion. And we're only going to get that difference of opinion when people feel safe to do that. So, that could be another Insight series. And, how do we get that safety, both physically and neurologically speaking or psychologically speaking? So if we have the leadership legwork, if we have the core values, the vision, the goals of the organization in mind, if we have the direction, now it's really about circling back to that and examining things through that lens consistently, recognizing when there's a new definition required, recognizing when a core value may no longer be serving us or it needs some tweaking in the way that we're talking about it and presenting it. Because it's very easy to put words on the wall, to put values on the wall, even with a couple of other additional describing words underneath it. But the fact is your employees are always going to see those words in their own way and measure those words in their own way. So the clearer we can get about those types of things, the better. And having the executive team commit and be heavily engaged in that process, so that, as you say, they are exemplifying, they are living the culture in which we want to create. Because it is my belief that if we are not intentionally building that infrastructure, whether we're thinking from the infrastructure within the brain and the synapses, or infrastructure in the processes that we have in the organization, what we're going to be left with is an accidental culture, a less intentional culture that, in my experience, often leads to that revolving door with HR. And that can be really challenging in those regards. Yeah. So it's about bringing all those wonderful attributes of what do we need at that high level, and how do we understand that there's some congruent decision-making, congruent values, knowing that it's almost never going to be as congruent as we want it to, because we're really complex human beings and there's always more to learn.
Can I chuck in a couple of thoughts? Would that be all right?
Please.
I didn't want to completely lose this idea of status that you talked about earlier, because it sounds important. What it means can be very different for people, and there's a couple of threads, right? One is a state of being. Okay, people sometimes say I am, or they say I do. Yeah. So if what's your job? If you say hello, tell me about what you do. Some people say I am the chief executive of the company. Yeah. Sometimes people say my job is being the chief executive of the company. So there's a separation of themselves from the role that they've got. And I think language is very important because it tells you a lot about yourself and about people when you're thinking about, status and what you do and how you are. Okay, that's just one reflection. All right. The other bit was coming back to this idea of behaviour, and I don't think we've mentioned it yet, but it probably will come up around accountability and what that really means. If I just to explore it a little bit, Mike, in relation to what you were saying, do you think that the leadership, so the values and the words get put on the wall, we often hear about that, but how important is it for executives to really think about their own behavior and holding themselves accountable for that, as opposed to having a narrative about holding other people to account?
Oh dear.
And that that kind of comes back to the status question as well.
Okay.
Sorry
No,
to chuck that one in.
let's throw out some keywords here. Okay, so I want to talk about primates on this topic. I want to talk about a particular CEO that we're seeing right now in today's date, March of 2025, and this most recent thing that you brought up around self-awareness and the impact of status. So first of all, let's talk about self-awareness again, just because it was the last thing that you mentioned. That's a skill. And it's not necessarily a skill that everyone has. And you can have all the self-awareness in the world, and that's only 50% of it. It's what you choose to do with that self-awareness. And so often when we're talking about ourselves, we're not trained on how to do that well. We learn more about triangles in high school than we do about ourselves. Okay, and hopefully that's okay for me to say. So what happens is we develop a particular acumen. We go to university or college, or we get some mentorship and training, and we learn a particular thing. But at a certain point in our career, especially if we're productive, we end up needing to be in a position of leadership. We have to train other people. We have to manage. We have to coach. And to do those things often benefits by having vulnerability to say, can I share with you a story that I went through? I don't want to tell you what to do in this difficult thing, this difficult circumstance, but if you're open to hearing a story about, where I really screwed up, where I really fell on my face, and what I learned for myself, and if there's anything in there for you, great, right? But that actually requires some storytelling, that self-awareness, and being detached, going, I want to share something with you, and if there's anything relevant there, great. If there isn't, all good. I won't share another story for another 6 months or something like that, right? So that's one thing I would say, is that even just the ability to go, I'm trying to improve my self-awareness, and I know there's certain areas where I can be a little bit hesitant or a little bit frustrated, and I'm working on it. So if you notice it, if you notice that kind of clunkiness or that confusion or that frustration, and it's not going well for you, just feel free to adjust your glasses with two hands like this, or take your notebook and just kind of flip it over gently, and all know that I'm in that state of mind. And I refer to that as giving ammunition to other people to shoot you with it, so that they know, so that it's safe for them to go, oh, they're doing that thing, they're saying those things that they wanted to improve upon, right? And we can weave that through all kinds of observable behavior, language, Jungian terminology, blah 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 blah. But we won't get into that today. So is that the wind? Good thing we can edit that out. You can mute. Do you want to mute your phone while you have a chance? I'm assuming that's your phone. Go for it, Lee.
I think somebody just walked past the front door, Mike.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so self-awareness, it's what you do with it. It connects to vulnerability. That's a skill in and of itself. It's a lifelong journey, and we have to just appreciate and accept that everyone comes to that journey differently, and there's no benefit in judging it in other people. One thing to share, and I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I'm not necessarily a scientist, even though I'm a big fan of science. But I heard something about primates a long time ago that I thought was really important. And I'll often ask clients when we talk about this idea of status, and I'll just ask a client. So I'll ask you, What do you think the most important competency is of an alpha male in a group of primates? What do you think their most
Uh,
important competency is?
is there only one, or can I pick two?
You can pick as many as you like.
Well, okay, so I'm going to say.
I want you to first think in terms of power, and what do you think the traditional response I get from clients might be? And let's bring in that word power again.
What's the traditional response? Well, the alpha male is there to have children and make sure that they get, their offspring sorted out. They're also there to act as a kind of leader, and there's something for me that comes up about protecting, and making sure that there is, I don't know, there's some sort of order to the society. There you go. There's
So
three
does the thought process of
ideas.
asserting dominance, does that come to mind? They have to be
Yeah,
big,
well,
they got to be
yeah,
tough, they got to be intimidating. Okay.
yeah,
So that's
yeah,
traditionally what I hear. They got to be the biggest, baddest, don't mess with me kind of person on the block, and that's how they lead. That's something that they need to do.
yeah.
And I believe what was found out, and I wish I should probably have the researcher's name who I learned this from, but it would have been many, many years ago. Is that actually their job is to produce trusting reciprocal relationships. Their job is actually to be well liked by the important other primates. Okay, because if I'm a chimpanzee and I eat one too many fermented apples, and I'm not well, I'm not my biggest best self. I need a nap in the middle of the day. If I don't have others that are interested to look out for my best interests and who want to protect me, well, guess what? There's going to be a new alpha male pretty quickly. So the ability to ensure how it is that that we are protected is important. So one way in which primates, chimpanzees as an example, can do this. And please, if I'm making shit up and I'm wrong here, please correct me. I never want to do that, but I know I'm speaking quite generally. Is that there will be a source of food in the form of meat. Okay, and that is a highly prized resource amongst a group of primates. And the alpha male will often lead the charge. Okay, often against another group of primates or something like that. And once they collect the resource, who they choose to share that resource with is sort of what determines whether you're in my band, in my close circle, or you're not. And so what
Right.
happens is through creating scarcity and or abundance, they're able to ensure who has their back and who needs to be cautious. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, human beings are much more advanced primates. Okay. And take that with a grain of salt. If you believe in evolution, great. If you don't, that's perfectly fine as well. We can always
Mm-hmm.
tailor the conversation in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is we still have that heavily ingrained within us. So what does that mean? Now I'm a director in an organization. I've been given a certain allotment of bonuses that I can give to other people. And guess what happens? The same function can kind of happen. If there's someone
Mm-hmm.
who didn't meet my expectation, caused me a lot of conflict, well, you better believe I'm biased and I might be less likely to give them a share or a fair share of some of that resource. And so these things get complicated very quickly because, again, someone will make a decision. It'll have optics to it. It'll have a particular perception by those who get to witness that decision. But the executive or the individual may not always get vulnerable and communicate what that is.
Mm-hmm.
To say the reason why, right? Or I want you to know next year will be different. This year I felt was a little bit bumpy. I'd like to see these KPIs improve. I'd like to see these relationships improve. And I want you to know it's not that I'm giving your portion to somebody else. It's that I'm keeping that portion for about 6 more months so that we can have some incentive to develop these areas, right? So that's that
Mm-hmm.
self-awareness, understanding cause and effect, understanding the optics of a particular decision. Okay. So does that kind of track here? Does that?
Well, yeah, I mean, at a very simple level, it sounds to me like you're saying if we don't just communicate the what we're doing, but we also communicate the reason why we're doing it, that, yeah, it's helpful.
Well, do you see how now we're getting closer to the research of Dr. David Rock and the Neuro Leadership Institute? Because now what you're describing as status then connects to how we engage and develop certainty in other people, right? So
Yeah.
we won't dive too much into that. So now let's talk about why is it so important? Why is it so important? Okay, it's important because our brains are wired for it. We are social creatures. And so our brain is developing in this way to organize things through that social lens.
Mike, you've mentioned this idea of David Rock's model, and without getting into it too much, there is a great model that is out there that we can use to kind of help us, the SCARF model, and status. Just going back to that again, I use the word power. Yeah,
Mhm.
you've kind of nuanced it to say, well, you prefer status. That's great. So sometimes I've heard it, the term hard power and soft power, and I could understand that. You've made me think about this idea of hard status and soft status. So, that you have a position in an organization which may or may not give you status, which is actually easy to lose or gain through a process of promotion or performance management or whatever else people use in organizations. There is also this respect and not respect type of status that you can have, which isn't about position in an organizational sense. It's about your personal standing.
Mhm.
And I think I'm right, although, please do say if you see it differently, that status, as we've just been talking about it, is kind of felt deeper at that personal level, if it's about your own personal status and respect. And it kind of goes back to this idea where people talk about, I am something, or this is what I do. If those two things can get confused, or muddled up, status, both personal status and status in terms of an organizational hierarchy, can get blended together. And I'm not altogether sure that they are actually the same thing, but they can be perceived that way.
Okay.
Um,
So what we're doing now is we're nearing a conversation that really revolves around what I call the game and organizational politics. Okay. And to put it very lightly, it's basically the awareness of who do I need to please, who don't I need to please, and why does that matter to me? Okay.
mhm,
And it's where we get special treatment, meetings after the meetings, bias, all these kinds of things. Okay. Now, you were talking about hard and soft power. To me, stuff like that, right over my head. I don't like language like that. And I
mhm,
was laughing earlier because it just reminds me of the term soft skills, which just absolutely drives me bonkers. Because the
mhm,
fact is we talk about they're interpersonal skills. Okay. They're not
mhm,
soft.
mhm,
And they're the most challenging. They're the most difficult skills for people to practice and to practice well. Because
mhm,
it's never a degree that you get. It's never a box that's checked and you have it for the rest of your life. We're human
mhm,
beings. We're complicated. Our physiology changes. Our values change. Our life circumstances change, and so it's never static. Um,
mhm,
so anyway, that's my 2 cents over that. You mentioned earlier about this idea of holding people accountable. I have a huge, bee in my bonnet over that as well. The fact is we don't have control over other people.
mhm,
And the more you have positional power or positional status, and you wield that as your form of influencing other people or controlling the outcome, it's often going to have an adverse effect. Okay. It might not
mhm,
have an adverse effect right away. You might get what you want, but a week later, a month later, 6 months later, you may be having to source new talent. Um, so the fact for me is simply that we're describing the difference between positional authority or positional status and
mhm,
or organic influence. Okay, that's the way
mhm,
the term that I like. Organic meaning doesn't matter whether I'm a frontline employee or I'm head of the organization. People value me and they value my ideas and they value what I say, and they're also able and comfortable to disagree with me because I've taught them, I've trained them that actually I am just right for me. And even though I'm, in charge of an organization or in charge of a department, doesn't mean that I'm going to make perfect decisions. And that if I take a little bit of time to communicate, to verbalize an idea I have, a direction I want to go in, and I'm receptive and I'm balanced, I may actually end up with a much higher definition as far as what I could accomplish or how I can bring people along with me for the journey. But guess what? That takes time, it takes
Hmm.
energy, and it's a skill. And so, it's really easy, just being the boss, just telling people what to do. And we've been in this pattern for a really long time. And without
Mm.
getting into a huge dynamic about it, the fact is we need more women in leadership. We've been dealing with the I feel like we need a little, the blurt button for me to swear. But we're dealing with the egos. We're dealing with the I'm bigger, I'm stronger. What's that movie? It reminds me of. Sorry, I promise I'll get back on topic. But the Matilda movie. Okay,
Hmm.
I'm big, you're small. I'm smart, you're dumb. Right?
Mm.
And it's just sorry. There's a couple more. I used to remember it, but clearly I'm getting a little too passionate here. So
Mm.
those are things that come to mind for me. Is that we have influence, whether it's good or not. Um, and being aware of that, because if I assume I have influence, and I'm predicting that people are going to follow along, that people are going to like my idea, and then that's not what happens, and I don't have any coping mechanisms for that. I don't have a coach or someone I can lean on to get some perspective. I'm not practicing vulnerability and asking for feedback. Those are also going to lead to some challenges as well. So
Mm.
to me, humility, big part of being an effective executive. How else could you be aligned to something if you weren't open to even learning if you are aligned to it?
Mm.
And so, yeah.
Mm. I think, though, it's possible that that doesn't, the absolute opposite of that happens. That people feel that they've made it. That actually now I'm here, I've got what I need. You can't tell me anything. Or I. No other organization in the sector we work in is better than we are, therefore we're not. They've got nothing to teach us. And do you know what, Mike, from where I'm standing these days, I just think that's crazy. I mean, there's always something to learn, there's always something personal to learn, there's always something. There's I love the word growth these days, keeping an eye on that. Am I shrinking or am I growing?
So
um
let's label it.
yeah.
Okay. It's toxic. And there's all kinds of
Yeah.
language we can apply to it. But even a word like toxic, if we're going to come to the table and talk about what does it mean to be aligned as an organization, as an executive team, to produce a more productive, more meaningful, more welcoming culture, we may benefit by also identifying what we don't want. What is toxic leadership? What is arrogance? What is ego? And we all have egos, and that's
Hmm.
okay. But being able to stand in your shoes and go, my ego is hurt. I was assuming people would come along for the ride for me, and I'm falling down here, and I'm really I'm confused.
Mm.
Most people don't learn. Most people aren't taught how to practice that skill. What we are taught is to be perfect, or to give
Hmm.
people the impression of perfectionism, to shy away from attention from our mistakes. Um, and it gets very positional. And so that is exactly true, that you get people who say, I've been here 20 years, I've put in my time, I'm finally the one with all the cards, and I'm going to play them. And I'm going to play them the way
Mm.
I want to. And if you don't like it, well, that's on you. And
Hmm.
this is where it can be really challenging. So I think that's just maybe something to reiterate, is that, yeah, let's talk about what alignment is. Let's talk about our core values. Let's talk about what behaviors demonstrate that, and let's take a moment to actually identify what we don't want. What those toxic behaviors are. And if we label them well enough, if we're cognizant and we communicate them enough, guess what? We're going to be able to spot them better. And we could do another thing that says, what do we want to do when one of our executives, when one of our leaders in the organization is being perceived as a bully? What do we want to
Hmm.
do when they're being perceived as arrogant, as disengaging other people? What's the process we want to follow? What services do we want to provide? um, and maybe as a tangent here, um, I really encourage organizations to hire slowly and fire quickly. um, I know that sounds privileged and maybe not fair in some situations, but um, I cannot express the conflict, the damage, and the loss of engagement that can come from keeping someone in a role who in the first 90 days, the first 6 months, made it obvious that they weren't a fit. And yeah, anyway, that's maybe a different topic.
I don't know. I think it's a good topic though, based on where we are, because we're sort of talking about alignment, right?
Well,
We're talking about alignment.
And sort of just to bring in here, that's a skill as well, to actually go, wait a second, we've hired someone and they're exhibiting attributes that aren't connected to our core values.
Yeah.
What can we do? What are our options as an organization? What does their employment contract state? How much coaching, how much conflict resolution do we want to engage in before we say, you know what? We think you'd be better in another organization. And we see what you do bring. There's value to what you bring. But we'd actually encourage you. We want to provide a letter of recommendation. We want to help you get a foot in the door in another organization where you may be a much better fit for the culture there, because we're just not feeling that the fit for the culture's here. But we have integrity. We want to be people focused. And just because you may not be a great fit for our organization, we want to put the time, the energy, and the resources into supporting you in your next adventure. Now, that's where politics comes in, because sometimes even just being honest about those things is not really within the rules. We can't really do that sometimes, depending on the structure of the organization.
And I think this is what we were talking about. Certainly, I know I was reflecting on it earlier on, is that these are deeply human things, and leaning into those and kind of facing up to the difficult stuff is hard. Yeah, because to some extent you're having to do some soul searching on yourself in order to be able to kind of do that. And it's very easy to go into a situation and really lead and hard with being critical and judgmental, and like, you don't fit in here, and have language which is kind of detrimental to the individual, rather than looking at it in a less judgmental but more observational way, and then leaning in at the human level. I mean, I've heard you say before, and I think it's always resonated with me, is that if we are able to be a human being first and foremost, then a leader, and then and only then a manager, right, then a lot more will come right, because otherwise what happens is we go too quickly to process, right, and we cut out the human element, the human connection element, which is, before we do all of that, can we just have a conversation about what's happening? Because do you know what I mean? I can hear you chuckling. So yeah,
what do you think? Come to mind, Case. Couple of things. So first of all, what we're describing is the difference between grace combined with tough love, and ego or arrogance, and what's easy for me. I've already identified you as a problem. I don't want to coach. I don't want to provide training. You've already upset me enough. Again, deeply human, right? I'm just biased now because I don't like you. You've given me plenty of reasons not to like you. And instead of me getting vulnerable about that, I actually go to, you're not working out, you're missing deadlines, blah, 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 blah. I'm not taking any interest in why or what's contributing to that or the dynamics on your team. I'm just going, this is what's going to be easier for me. You're not giving me what I want, so I'm going to go to market and try and find somebody who will. And that affects culture. And those decisions, whether they're overly visible or not, do spread throughout the organization and do become apparent in some way, shape, or form. And again, people are intelligent and they're highly perceptive to these things. And so if it feels as like someone's exited from the organization and it's not fair, we think it's just one person who's leaving with that interpretation, but you better believe they live in the community, they go to similar events, that information is going to spread through the organization at lightning speeds. So
yeah, absolutely. So Mike, I'm going to pause us there so that we can take a breath and move on to the next section.
You got some more challenging questions